Hi, I'm Barbara Lucas, and welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental topics that green up our world. Founded in 1965, the Huron River Watershed Council is dedicated to preserving Michigan's cleanest urban river. Joining me today is Elizabeth Riggs, a watershed planner with the Huron River Watershed Council, here to tell us how homes located near the shore can affect water pollution. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Barbara.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the Watershed Council?
I'd be happy to. The Watershed Council has been around since 1965, as you mentioned, and that makes us the first and the oldest watershed council in Michigan. And
that's great.
Yeah, we're doing very well, and thankfully the river's benefiting from all the hard work of our staff and also the hundreds of volunteers who help us every year with our programs. We focus in a few different areas. We have a lot of programs, but primarily we do volunteer monitoring of the streams. And you may have heard of our programs like the Adopt a Stream program, where we have several hundred people who help us 3 times a year to study the health of the streams. We also have another growing volunteer program called the Bioreserve Project, where we have mapped and are now rapidly inventorying the remaining natural areas in our watershed, which is about 200,000 acres, because to have those healthy undeveloped areas is better for our river. We also do a lot of public information and education programs, neighborhood projects for pollution prevention. We just finished in the northern part of Ann Arbor, the Miller's Creek project, and that involved a number of activities with homeowners, including helping them with installing rain gardens and rain barrels. So I could go on and on, but that gives you a flavor of what we do.
Well, I'd love to talk to you more about some of them, specifically that Bioreserve project, but we won't have time to cover it all. Today we're going to focus, if it's okay with you, on projects that affect the water in terms of homes that are built near the water. So I'd like to get the ball rolling by starting out with a video that we produced for the Beaver Island Association. It's called A Home on the Shore. And we'll only show the section on siting because the movie's long and it goes into all kinds of different things. But this section tells us about what we can do when we're planning a home on the shore.
With great land comes great responsibility.
Building near water presents challenges. For instance, shorelines are in constant flux, always changing, especially in dune areas.
High winds means dunes move, and it's the property owner's responsibility to build in a location where they will not suffer or the land does not suffer.
Homes should be sited far from water and steep slopes and protected from the wind. Instead of building on the foredune, this house was set far back from the shore.
Behind the crest of the secondary dune, pretty well protected by some conifer trees and some junipers, as well as some other native species.
The constant shifting and molding of riverbanks and lake shores due to wind and water is a natural process. Normally, deep-rooted vegetation slows the erosion, but when the stabilizing vegetation is removed, erosion can increase, spelling trouble for our fisheries, which require clean, clear water to thrive, and it can threaten the foundations of our structures.
What's happening is that the land is moving. And if your structure's in the way, it's going to get sandblasted.
Keeping impervious surfaces away from water bodies is important as well. When water falls on trees and vegetated soil, its force is slowed. But when water hits an impervious surface, such as a rooftop or driveway, it collects force and can become a strong erosive power and contribute to water pollution.
Anything that runs off your house is going to flush right there. And when water is flushed like that, it's not cleaned because it hasn't gone through the soil. The microorganisms haven't had the chance to clean it.
Use materials for driveways and walkways that allow water to drain through to the underlying soil. And direct downspouts to divert stormwater away from steep slopes and shorelines. Septic systems near water are another threat to environmental quality, especially if sited near wells or less than the required distance above groundwater.
For the microorganisms to clean up the water before it hits the water table. If you've got a lot of clay, you need to know that too, because they have to dig deeper and fill in for the septic field in order for the water to have enough room to soak through soil instead of running laterally If it runs laterally, what's going to happen is that it will carry the contaminants into the waterway. And that's where it will encourage the growth of algae and other harmful things.
Another important consideration is the size of your septic system.
If you take a summer house to an all-year-round house, you have to increase the size of the septic and the field.
The pre-construction phase is the golden opportunity to properly site your house, septic, and well.
Elizabeth, the movie talks about the pollution from the homes, and we're talking first about the pollution that's visible, the overland pollution. And so let's talk about, the movie opens with this lovely view of the Lake Michigan bluffs, all that sand. Now I know that around here we have inland lakes and riverbanks. Now in terms of erosion, is that a problem around here as well?
Soil erosion is one of the top problems or challenges that we have for the Huron River and its smaller streams that feed into it. You know, whether we have clay soils or sandy soils or silt soils, there is some amount of erosion that's happening. Now, just to be clear, some erosion is natural. One of the main functions of a river is to flow and to move sediment or soil through the system. Otherwise, we wouldn't have deltas, like the delta at the end of the Huron River and Lake Erie, and other, you know, more famous deltas you can think of on larger rivers around the world. But when we have too much erosion, that is the erosion that tends to be caused by our human activities, that's when it's a problem.
And why is that? Why is it such a problem?
Well, if you have too much of soil erosion and sedimentation happening in the channel of a stream, it can cause a number of ill effects that the biology, the aquatic insects, the fish, freshwater mussels, all those different organisms, that aquatic life that makes up our rivers, is endangered because that soil basically suffocates their habitat.
Oh, really?
And so it makes it a very inhospitable place for them to live. There are other impacts as well, but that's one of the key ones, and one that would probably resonate most with people who enjoy going out to the river, who like to fish. How
does it affect the spawning of the fish? I've heard something about the silt can cover their eggs, or?
Right. There are a number of aquatic insects that depend on, as well as the fish, depend on spaces in the cobbles or the gravel, whatever kind of natural stream bottom you have, in order to have a suitable place to lay their eggs. And when those get covered up, then they don't have that surface. They're not getting the oxygen requirements that they need. And so that definitely degrades the habitat for those various life cycles of the life in the stream.
And before the show, didn't you mention something about freshwater mussels are some of the most endangered species in the state or something?
Well, right. So actually it's across North America. The most endangered freshwater organisms are mussels. And that has a lot to do with the fact that mussels don't move very quickly. They find suitable habitat and then they stay there and they move very slowly. And so if conditions aren't right for them, if we are polluting the water with soil erosion and other chemicals and pollutants, they can't adjust as quickly and leave as fast as maybe fish would be able to. Yeah.
And some people might say, well, who cares about a mussel, but aren't they part of the ecosystem, or aren't there fish that depend on them, or something bigger?
Well, they're part of the ecosystem, and they are one of the most they're the most endangered freshwater species or organism in North America, and so we lose a part of our natural heritage too when we lose a species like that. On the flip side, they're also an indicator of good water quality. So we're very encouraged by the parts of the Huron River system where we have some notable mussel populations.
Well, that's great.
And we want to keep those that way. Yeah.
You'll hear a lot about buffers being really important, and the movie talked about that. What is it that happens between the house and the water body? What happens to that water that goes through the buffer?
Now, we work a lot with the residents in the communities in the watershed, which is 900 square miles, and the majority of the people living in the watershed aren't on a shoreline. They're not on river frontage or lake frontage. However, that we still view that group of residents as being really critical in the efforts to protect the river system, because that buffer area where the land and the water meet is called the riparian area.
Okay.
Some people have heard of riparian rights, and that really refers to this corridor where land and water meet. And we're finding more and more that that is a very critical and basically the most ecologically productive part of the watershed. Because of the filtering that plants do there, so any kind of polluted runoff that might be happening on our developed areas, whether they're homes or businesses or streets, as long as there's a buffer of a good size of flowering plants and grasses and shrubs and trees, that can very much help with removing those pollutants before it reaches the water. And there are other benefits to shading of the streams to help regulate stream temperature, which is important for the biology in the water.
Okay. Well, would you say then that the farther away the better, and if you're really far, you're pretty much 100% certain you're okay to build in that spot if you're far from the water?
You know, distance is usually a good indicator of what kind of impacts development will have on the water, so the farther the better. What the scientific literature has been showing, and this is a hot area of study really in the past 10 years or so, is that at least 100 feet distance from the water is going to be pretty protective. There are some folks that suggest more, maybe 300 feet, and it really depends on the site characteristics. What kind of slope do you have? What's the soil like? And
so a steep slope might be more of an issue than a more graduated slope?
Right, all of those factors come into play. One of the key things that has been identified, though, is that it's equally important, if not more important, to protect our headwater streams, those really small ones, because they are so easily influenced by our activities on the land. So it's sizing those buffers is as important as on the larger main rivers.
What if you're 100 feet from the shore and you're in that puts you in a wetland? Are there places that, you know, it doesn't matter how far, if you just shouldn't build?
Right, no, that's a good point, Barbara, because sometimes there just are not appropriate places to build. And wetlands are a good example. That's a low-lying area where there are going to be soils that don't drain well, and it's going to be flooded. So one needs to really read the landscape and think about long-term what kind of house you're going to have there. You know, I've visited some people who live in Dexter Township, for example, where there were problems of flooding that happened every year, and it was because those homes should never have been built between those two lakes in the first place. So whoever was doing the building didn't plan well for when there'd be high water.
Well, how can we assess those areas? You mentioned your what is it? The
Bioreserve project?
Okay, can you tell us about that, how that
Sure.
helps?
Yeah, so over the years, this part of Michigan has seen a lot of growth, and for a number of years, Livingston County, Washtenaw County have led the state in new growth and new residences, and so we've realized that there's a strong need to get a sense of what do we have left in terms of natural areas, and what are the quality of those. And so our Bioreserve project has been around now for a number of years, and we started with doing some aerial mapping of those remaining natural areas, and we developed a method to quickly assess them, because to visit 200,000 acres would take a long time, especially when we're using trained volunteers. Takes a long time, and we have now moved into the stage of having visited those sites, we're getting a sense of what quality they're in, and then maybe most importantly is doing the follow-up with the landowners and the communities to talk about long-term preservation of those areas.
Great.
Because we have to have the floodplains, the wetlands, the riparian areas, open areas, you know, with good draining soils. Those need to be protected if we're going to have any hope of protecting the Huron River system now and for future generations.
Okay.
We can't pave it all over.
True.
Yeah.
And once we do assess these areas and determine where would be important to protect, how can we protect them?
Well, there are a number of land conservation or preservation tools that are available, and we work with communities and property owners to tell them about all of them. One of the things that a community can do is to develop a natural features overlay zone that identifies where they need to protect land. They can also pass ordinances or change their master plans to have specific protections for that riparian zone. And then there's tools that land trusts or land conservancies use to protect land in perpetuity. You can do outright purchase of development rights or have something like a conservation easement that more and more property owners are using because there are nice tax breaks involved with those.
How does that tax break work?
Well, the best source on this information is going to be the local land trust and land conservancies in your area. But basically, a conservation easement is a tool that enables a landowner to keep the land in their, as part of their legacy, but then they sell those development rights for a particular portion of their property. And then that land is put into protection that follows with the deed of the property.
Okay. And the model ordinance for riparian buffers is on your website that different communities could access that?
Yes, we had developed with the assistance of the EPA and the state of Michigan a model riparian buffer ordinance that a community can use and tailor to their local needs, and we've had some success with that. Green Oak Township and Scioto Township, for example, have tailored that ordinance and have now adopted it and use that in their planning so that they protect that important part of their community.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, we're happy about it.
Say there's an area that's quite large and the developer thinks they could put in 10, 20, 30 homes. What are some things they could do to protect the shoreline when they have in the planning stage?
Yeah, well, I think typically what we have seen in the past, and we see still often, are people putting in these keyhole properties where everybody has a dock and a driveway and access to that shoreline. And sometimes if that's done right, that can still have some protective measures installed, but we really recommend that, first of all, before that site is developed, that the amount of grading and clearing that's done is kept to a minimum, so that during construction there's minimal impacts when they're clearing the site and putting in those housing footprints. And then also when construction is underway, to make sure that they have the proper soil erosion, soil control measures in place and that they stay maintained. That's often neglected in a development. And then other things that can be done during the planning of that development is to try to cluster the lots in an area that are going to be less impacting to the water and to other natural resources like maybe large trees that are on the site, and then have more of a common access, a shared access to the water with some protected natural areas.
Maybe shared trails, and nature trails, that kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, well, we're basically been talking about overland pollution, you know, water that's going from the house overland, like the erosion. Now, what about land, pollution that goes through the land down to the groundwater and connects from the septic system to the water body? I'd like to kind of change gears and talk about that. We've got a third of our homes here in Michigan are on septic systems, and myself, I've lived most of my life on in homes that have septic systems. And I have actually, I hate to admit, not really understood how they worked until pretty recently, and I've made a lot of mistakes, I think, doing the wrong thing because I didn't really understand how they work. Do you think that that's kind of common, that people don't really get it because they're underground and unseen?
Well, from the work that we've done with residents who live in areas where there are septic systems, it's a mixed bag. I think people who have grown up with septics tend to understand that they have certain needs and that there's care and feeding of your septic system, so to speak, that needs to be done. But especially with people moving from cities into more rural areas where they're not used to this idea of where their waste goes and where their water goes, we do find there's a need to educate that there are specific things people need to do in order to not overload the system and make sure they're treating the field well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's some problems because a lot of these places were built back when homes on water were seasonal. People just used it for a small vacation home. They went up
Right.
for a few weeks and they just took a few family members, and now a lot of them are being converted to year-round homes. Are some of them getting on sewer lines because of that?
Right. As you said, we're seeing more and more of that as people have decided to expand those homes to be year-round residences. It's, you know, they're attractive places to live. Everyone wants to live on the water. So some of the communities have made a push to provide sewer services to their lakes. There's the Multi-Lakes Water Authority that's in the northwestern part of Washtenaw County. So there are lakes that's pretty much northwest of the Chelsea area where they've worked together to bring sewer services to those lakes and remove the need for septics. And that was driven a lot because of concerns over water quality.
Well, the people that do have septics, I know there's a lot that can be done to do it right, because we made this little movie a few years ago on different things you can do, and I learned a lot from it actually. So I'd like to show this movie, and we're going to wrap up with that.
Over 40% of Michigan homes use septic systems to treat their household waste. These systems are underground, so are easy to ignore. But lack of proper care can result in costly problems that hurt our pocketbooks and our environment. Understanding your septic system is the first step to keeping it working properly. Here's how it works. When the wastewater from the house enters the tank, some of the solids settle to the bottom, and other waste such as oils and fats float to the top. Only the liquid from the middle zone leaves the tank for the drain field, where it flows through a series of pipes with openings that allow the water to percolate into gravel surrounding the pipes. As the wastewater moves into the gravel and the soil underneath, the contaminants in the sewage are filtered and treated with bacteria that occur naturally in the soil. Let's look at a few common myths. This family just paid $10,000 for their new septic system.
Now our system will last forever.
No way. The average life of a septic field is only 20 years.
But until then, we can use it without a care.
Actually, no. They must be treated carefully or they will fail even sooner.
What goes down our drains is gone for good.
Wrong again. Americans pump over 4 billion gallons of wastewater a day underground, and it doesn't just disappear. Septic systems connect to our environment. After being treated in our septic tanks and drain fields, wastewater re-enters our groundwater, streams, and lakes. Improperly treated household wastewater can contaminate our well water, swimming beaches, and wildlife habitat. Following a few simple guidelines will ensure your system works effectively. For instance, provide a barrier so vehicles don't drive or park over it. Compaction can remove the air spaces in the gravel, so critical to the percolation process. Tanks must be pumped regularly to remove the built-up sludge and scum layers. If there is not enough room in the tank for proper settling to occur, solids and fats can be pushed out before the tank can do its job. Solids that leave the tank can clog the pores between the stones. This will cause the drain field to become saturated and unable to treat the sewage, allowing contaminants to reach our environment and the system to back up.
Oh no.
It's really important to be careful what you put down your drain. Put fats in the trash so they don't clog up your system. Don't rely on your garbage disposal to get rid of food scraps. Compost or trash them instead. Gardens love your coffee grounds, but septics hate them. Drains aren't trash cans. These are some of the worst cloggers. Put them in your trash, not down your drain. And just because a label says it's flushable or biodegradable does not mean it's safe for septics. And septics do not remove chemicals. Take things like solvents, paints, and pesticides to your local household hazardous waste collection site. Septic systems also don't remove the chemicals in medicines, and these compounds are showing up in our lakes and streams, posing a danger to wildlife. So wrap and trash them instead. Phosphates are found in most dishwasher detergents and are not removed by septics. They end up in lakes and streams where they cause an overgrowth of algae, which fouls our beaches and removes vital oxygen from the water. Look for phosphate-free. As each gallon enters the tank, an equal amount is pushed out. The tank needs time to do its job properly, so don't use a lot of water-producing appliances all at once, and don't let water run unnecessarily. Until you need it, turn it off. And save up for full loads of laundry instead of lots of little ones. Buy low-flow toilets and replace old laundry machines, shower heads, faucets, and dishwashers with the new ones that follow today's water-saving standards. If you have a leaky faucet or toilet, fix it immediately. Even a slow leak can overwhelm your system. Watering over the drain field can also lead to saturation and septic system failure. Remember, it's all connected. For yourself and for future generations, please take good care of your septic system.
Well, Elizabeth, can you just tell us quickly about the project where the Huron River Watershed Council is looking for failing septic systems?
Sure. We've known for a while that failing septic systems in Washtenaw County and in the watershed are a main source of pathogens and also excess phosphorus, a nutrient. And so now that some of the spatial imagery has become more sophisticated, we're working with our project partners at Washtenaw County and Sanborn Map Company and Photoscience to use the latest spatial and aerial imagery to try to develop a failure probability map that enables us to basically looking at vegetation on the ground to try and identify where there is some failures of septics. Okay. So we're excited about that.
I'm glad you're doing that. And can people learn more about it on your website?
Yeah, our website is www.hrwc.org.
Great. Well, thank you very much for being here today. I'm sorry we have to cut it short.
Thanks.
If you'd like to learn more about this topic, go to ewashtenaw.org/greenroom. There you'll find links to both a home on the shore and the septic system video as well. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.